We're on to the fourth video for our online lesson introducing fiscal policy. In this one, we're going to take a slightly closer look at some of the features of UK fiscal policy, taking care to look at some data and giving you an idea of some of the numbers and figures involved. So, as a starting point, you can see this chart on the screen, which shows you the tax revenue in recent years and spending. Your task is to take a quick look at the data and then tackle the two questions on the right hand side of the screen. You might want to just pause while you do so, pause the video and then restart when you're ready. Just a quick reminder, thinking about some exam technique and exam skills here, that first question is about describing the trends in the data. It's not asking you to explain the trends. Description is quite a different command word to explain. So just bear that in mind while you take a look at this question. And when you're finished, just restart the video to take a look at some suggested answers. Here goes. So, looking at the trends in the data, hopefully you spotted that both tax revenue and government spending rose over the period shown. Now, the next little bit of my answer is a really useful thing to do when you are handling data and tackling data style questions in an exam. We have actually decided to do some calculations. It just helps us to give a sense of the scale and the changes. So tax revenue has risen by about 30% and government spending by around 16%. You could have said more simply that tax revenue has risen by a greater proportion than government spending. You could potentially also have said that spending for the whole period has been above tax revenue. So there are a number of pieces of data there that you could describe. So the second question, what might you be able to conclude about the trend in the size of the annual budget deficit in the UK? So the budget deficit on that chart is the vertical distance between the two lines, the difference between government spending and tax. So because spending is higher than tax, this government is therefore running a constant budget deficit. You should be able to see, though, that pretty much over the whole period, the size of that gap has shrunk. In other words, the budget deficit is falling. So on the screen there for you, there are some more key features of UK government spending. I'm just going to take a look at some questions relating to each of those items as we go. So the first bullet point there was an estimate of government spending in financial year of 2019-2020. This was before the announcement of the Chancellor of the Exchequer's plans to help the UK economy in the wake of coronavirus. So the initial estimates are those shown on the screen. So government spending expected to be around £841 billion in that financial year from April 2019 through to the end of March 2020. So that's around 38.2% of national income. So quick question here for you. Why do we often express economic data as a proportion of GDP? Well, it allows us to do comparisons between different countries. So 841 billion on its own doesn't really tell us very much about how big or small that number might be. Some countries are much bigger in terms of their GDP and some are much smaller. So what we need to do is express the total amount as a proportion of GDP to help us get a sense of scale of the importance of the spending. We express all sorts of economic data as proportions of GDP. It could be budget deficits, it could be trade balances and so on. The next two bullet points there, looking at the biggest items of spending, health, education and defence, and the amount on capital investment, which is around 10% of the total. One thing to think about here might be why economies at different stages of development might have a different pattern of spending. Now, in the UK, we are a developed economy. Most people in the country have access to basic necessities. So our government perhaps needs to spend a little bit less on those. It's able to afford to spend more on healthcare, partly because of the nature of the economy. We're not looking at just providing basic sanitation, for example, like a government in a developing economy might do. We're able to focus on different things. So lots of other things you might be able to think about there as well. And down at the bottom, as we already identified in video 3, the biggest item of welfare spending is the state pension at just over £100 billion a year. So here's just a quick task for you. Do some quick research to just find out the value of the state pension. Okay, so that was a little bit on government spending. Here we've got some features of UK government tax revenue in order from lowest through to highest. It's worth just taking a moment to pause the video at this point and just take a look at some of those numbers. Maybe note down any surprises. Even now, after seeing this data for years and years and years, I'm always really surprised actually how little corporation tax revenues seem to be in comparison to things like VAT, national insurance and income tax. Little thinking task here, and again there's no correct answer to this at the moment. Just stop to think, which sources of tax revenue do you think might be most likely to fall as a result of the impact of COVID-19, the coronavirus, on the UK economy? That's just a little thinking exercise. And finally, I'm not going to talk through the information on the slide. What you can do is just pause the video if you're interested in keeping up to date with fiscal policy. At the time of production of this video, on the 27th of March 2020, these are the key aspects of fiscal policy already announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Do try and stay up to date with developments in that area if you can.